Well, hello everyone. I'm delighted to have been asked to do this virtual presentation today. First, let me just say a big thank you and actually well done to Sammy and all at Biga for the huge amount of work they've put into presenting this education week. So well done to all there. So this talk today is called the Grasscutter to Scientist, the Fairway to Education, subtitled Anyone Can Cut Grass, or Can They? And basically, there's nothing mind-numbingly scientific in it today. You'll be glad to hear. It's fairly light-hearted. Look back over 40 years in the business and how things have changed. So what I'm going to talk about is actually that's not me there in the photo, by the way. But thanks to Brian Dunn down in the Dare for that. I want to talk about what turfgrass management was like back when I started back in the early 80s. And we look at how things have changed over the years. We have obviously much better equipment and products. The huge differences there since I started out. But there's also a lot of new challenges. We've always had challenges in the business, but in the last few years there's been a lot more, I think, coming in, with chemical restrictions, environmental awareness, climate change. But I want to, towards the end, I want to talk about education, because that has been the biggest difference I've seen in the last 40 years. The availability of education, different pathways we can follow to go about it, and then towards the end, I'm going to talk about the trials and tribulations of working full-time while you're doing a part-time education, doing a PhD in fact. Some funny and interesting points in that now, I must say. So you probably know I was a greenkeeper for almost 40 years at the superintendent of the Royal Curragh Golf Course in Ireland, which is Ireland's oldest course. But more recently now I'm concentrating on being a fully independent researcher, and I look at things into like turfgrass diseases and the effects of physiology, which is great, very interesting, and I like to go around talking about it too. Now obviously since March our travels have been very restricted, so luckily enough we have these virtual opportunities here which are pretty good. So what was golf like back in the last century? But here's a clue. Now I remember walking onto a green for the first time. Actually, my father-in-law actually got me the job on the golf course back in the 82, 83. And when I walked onto a green for the first time, this is what I thought, and I can remember this clearly. How nice and soft and springy this was. It was like walking on a mattress. And of course, there's about 2 inches of thatch. Now, this is not down to the greenkeeper's fault really, because back then, first of all, golf courses, or the majority of courses, were totally understaffed, and the greenkeepers were only regarded basically as agricultural workers. They had no say into the management, treated just as labourers basically. So things like aeration, top dressing were not very commonplace, I'm afraid. Now we did have some aeration equipment, as you can see here. For example, this was a pedestrian slitter, which we had a lend of. We didn't actually own it. And you can imagine, you were walking up and down the green with that, and then you have to walk to the next green. So, aeration was wasn't that often carried out. Greens maybe got the odd run of it every year if they were lucky. So turf management operations back then were fairly basic. There's minimum inputs and maintenance procedures. So, what we did do was, the top dressing at that time. Now this actually is true. This is what we were advised to do by an agronomist, a doctor. I tell you what, I wouldn't believe half the things these doctors tell you. But apart from that, so our top dressing program at this time was actually screened topsoil. So basically it was fine clay particles spread out over a soil push-up green. So that was fairly drastic. You're sealing the surfaces there fairly consistently. But I mentioned low inputs of maintenance and that, but everything was fairly low input except for the nitrogen. Again, our program then, again on the agronomic advice at the time. So just remember now, this was on POA-dominated push-up greens with Ireland's climate, perfect for grass growth. And at that time, there was 450 kgs of nitrogen going out per year. And this was all, in fact, sulfate of ammonia. Started in March, every couple of weeks, right through to the end of August. So a lot of nitrogen going out, hardly any aeration, and the top dressing was basically clay particles. So that was it then. Basically, our maintenance procedures back then would involve, this is the early 80s, we had a mowing of greens. Now we had a triplex mower, as you can see. But to get my little highlighter here. No, this is the highlighter. So we had a ride-on mower, I think it was a Toro GM3, and we had one tractor and a gang mower. So basically our maintenance procedure was to mow the greens. We had to clean up after the sheep as well. At that time, the entire course was grazed by sheep, so the organic output, let me say, was quite considerable, and so that required a lot of attention. So yeah, so we had one tractor, gang mower, which was used mostly for cutting the daisies on the fairways. Also, what else did we have? Yes, well, if we had a dry spot or localized dry areas, again, this was on the agronomic advice. I can remember clearly going down to the local shop and clearing the shelves of Fairway liquid. So that was our wetting agent, our surfactant. So things were fairly basic in those days, now I have to say. And I think that was probably consistent right through possibly most of the courses in Ireland and the UK, apart from the high-end courses maybe, but that was fairly standard procedures, I think. So anyway, things began to change as we got into the 1990s. For one thing, we started to educate ourselves big time. We started reading up on things from the STRI, their leaflets, Jim Arthur's booklets and that, and I started doing a greenkeeping course at the Botanic Gardens in Dublin. A lovely place for a college, I have to say. City and Guilds in greenkeeping, and so we started to educate ourselves, as we say, and started learning, and our outlook started changing. We also then were able to put pressure on our committees to start purchase. I was going to say upgrade our machines, but we didn't have any machines to upgrade, so we had to purchase new machines, I should say. So, for example, we would have bought this machine here, this Cushman, a 3-wheeler, and we bought all the some of the accessories for it as well. So we had some tools to do the work, and we were able to start aerating regularly. And we also had a conveyor type top dresser with the Cushman as well. So we started top dressing then, not using this fine clay particles, but the proper specified wash sand, which of the proper particle size distribution. And we had this, for example. This was a Sisis slitter, which I'm sure everyone or most people now would be familiar with. Great tool, and that's still on the go actually after what 30 years. So good machine that for opening up the surfaces. We also had this. Now if I was doing this live presentation, I would be asking, put your hands up, especially for the young lads, to say what exactly that was. Now it always reminds me of one of these mines you'd see in the World War II films, but actually that's our first hollow coring machine, which went on the back of the Cushman. And you can see the tines here. They would extract the cores and go into the drum, and then you go off and empty the drum wherever you wanted to collect your cores. Now the only drawback with this was that the tines were only at the maximum 2 inches, but still, it was a start. We start of some decent aeration being carried out. So again, at this time, the early 90s, we started aerating, we started top dressing, we started educating, and we cut back on our nitrogen inputs. We started going towards a more recognizable modern nutritional input. And we noticed the difference. Our greens started to firm up and they started to play well. So people really enjoyed playing on them. Well, actually, I meant playing golf and not just playing on them. But things were improving. So we moved towards the 2000s then, and things really started to pick up. We were getting our act together, as you could say, and we were getting some good products coming through. Some of them even had some research to back them up at that time, which was unusual. And machinery started picking up as well. So I said we mentioned the Cushman back in 1990, late 80s, early 90s. But we started buying things like ride-on Fairway mowers. And as you can see here, this type of machine really made a huge difference in the not only in the presentations of the course, but in the quality of the playing surfaces. So these new products and new maintenance procedures were coming through from around the world, and we were picking up on them, and it made a big impact. Comparing the course from say the early 80s to the mid or late 90s, there's quite a difference in not only in the presentation but in the quality of the playing surfaces. So what has made the biggest impact on course maintenance over the years? I actually asked this question on social media about 2 years ago and got some interesting responses. But for me, my personal selection would be regards to equipment. I would think things like ride-on mowers made a huge impact, going from just basic hand mowers to triplex and Fairway ride-ons. That's one on the list for me anyway. Vertidrains, again, the value of vertidrains regarding course aeration is immense, as was the Procore type aerators. Again, you can do a huge amount of work with these with little disruption. So again, that's on the list for me. Now, top dressers with spinning disc applicators. If you've ever top dressed 18 greens just using a shovel, you'll know the difference these top dressers can make. And of course, these integrated sprayers, instead of using the 200-litre agricultural sprayers on the back of a tractor, these new sprayers are very, very efficient and beneficial to all sorts of course maintenance procedures. Now, with regards to products, I would say foliar fertilizers, going from using granulars, which are giving you these peaks and troughs through the year. Using foliars, you can apply, you can spoon feed whatever nutrients you require at whatever rates suits your own particular preference. So foliar fertilizers, a big benefit. Plant growth regulators, again, if you're managing, certainly parkland courses, inland, where you have a lot of growth. I use PGRs on greens, but for me, the biggest benefit I found was using them on fairways, where you can control your lush growth and reduce things like clumping of grass after when you have to mow with heavy dews or during sort of damp periods. So PGRs, yep, another one there. Seed head suppressants, again, managing POA based or POA dominated swards, seed head suppressants were of great value in maintaining quality surfaces. Wetting agents, now surfactants, we've come a long way from fairy liquid, I have to say, and these days there's a lot of technology and research gone into surfactants. As a matter of fact, I did some work last summer, and not only can you view surfactants as helping you with your soil moisture and infiltration and that, but what we found was that using surfactants actually will improve overall turfgrass quality even during wet periods. So a lot going on there with surfactants, I have to say. And of course, one thing I have to mention is phosphate. Again, a huge benefit and of interest to me over the years, I have to say. Well, like I said, I put this question out on social media, And a lot of the answers I got back, you could actually tell the age of the respondents from the answers I was getting in. Some of the older guys were coming up with similar stuff to what I have put up there. But the younger guys were coming up with things like GPS sprayers. Yep. Robot mowers. Again, this is a lot of future here with the robot mowers. A lot of labour saving going on there. Buffalo blowers. This came in from a lot of guys in the States. Must be pretty beneficial to them. I'm not sure exactly. I don't think I've ever had a buffalo blower. The soil moisture meters. Again, a great tool to use, be it a Spectrum TDR or a Pogo. Great benefit when you're managing your irrigation or soil moisture on the greens and other areas. And of course, rollers. We didn't have rollers back in the 80s or probably 90s, but the benefits of these regarding the playability of your surfaces and of course overall plant health can't be underestimated. So as the years rolled on from the late 90s into the 2000s, the course is certainly around. The presentation and the playability has increased dramatically from all these new equipment, new products, new techniques. But of course, also then golfer expectations also increased. Nothing new there, says you. But I found the members wanted better playing surfaces. They wanted good playing surface, obviously, right from June to September, but they wanted these year round, right through December and January. And of course, then there was the dreaded Augusta effect. So the pressures on greenkeepers and their workloads increased. There's nothing new in greenkeepers, of course, accepting new challenges in that. Because one thing that I've learned, and I'm sure most of you have learned also, is that there's always new challenges in this business. There's always something coming up that you have to overcome. And we're very good at doing that, I think. So today, for example, we have a lot of new, apart from the old challenges which you have to deal with, preparing the course through all sorts of inclement weather and golfer expectations. So we have a lot of new challenges also in the last few years. We have restrictions on plant protectants, reduced fungicides, no controls for worm casting or leather jackets. So we have to work to overcome them and work our way around it. We have environmental issues, which they weren't at the forefront back in the 80s, but nowadays we're all in the business very much aware that we are there to safeguard and protect the environment in which our golf courses are based. So that's something that we've risen to and we're working on as well. We also have to deal with things like climate change. There's definitely changes I've seen since back to the 80s again. There's definitely changes in the seasons and increased problems with weather, I think. And also something that has come up to the forefront the last couple of years is that the pressures that our working lifestyles have on our sort of mental well-being and our family life. So these are all pressures that have come to the fore recently. So I mentioned there a minute ago all the changes and improvements and things that I asked people online to come up with, but no one actually mentioned this. What has made the biggest impact on course maintenance over the years? No one mentioned education. And for me, I think that's, it's no point in having all these fancy tools and products if you don't know the best way to use them. And education is the way forward, I think. Now, don't get me wrong, you have to tie the education in with the experience of many years of working on the course, and it's this combination of experience and education that tips the balance in our favors, I think. So, and I wrote about this a couple of years ago. I did a piece for Trinity College, first of all, and it was picked up by the golf course for a number of magazines, but this is from the golf course industry in the US. And basically it came up from a hashtag on Twitter at one stage which said anyone can cut grass. And basically, some people were thinking, we're back to the time when we were laborers, agricultural laborers, and all we do was cut grass. So I put up in the article, what exactly does a turfgrass manager do? Turfgrass could be a greenkeeper, a groundsman, or anyone involved in maintaining all these fantastic facilities here. So, I pointed out the fact that we are actually responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of multi-million euro or multi-million pound, hello Brexit, sorry, multi-million pound assets. And, you could be a golf course in Ireland, a soccer stadium in Prague, cricket grounds in England, it could be rugby venues, or the Olympic venues in Brazil. I think I wrote this around the time of the Brazil Olympics. But, we're responsible for all these fantastic playing surfaces. And apart from having the experience, you need science to produce the quality sports surfaces used by many millions of spectators and participants worldwide. And I pointed out the fact that the groundsman nowadays, or the greenkeeper, is not just an agricultural worker. Sorry, agricultural workers, if you're listening in, but you have to be adept, and you have to understand things like plant biology and physiology. You have to know about soil science, turfgrass species, cultivation and construction practices, drainage, irrigation, machinery management, personnel management, which is very tricky, and of course my favorite, which of course is pests and diseases. So, where do you start if you went on this education path? Well, for me, I started back in 1990. I did a certificate in sports turf management, a City and Guilds. I went on then to Myerscough in the 2000s and did a degree, a foundation degree, sports turf science. Moved on to a Bachelor of Science. And then what you can do is, if you wanted, you can go on and do a master's degree after your BSc. Or I skipped that and went straight into doing a PhD in plant pathology. Now, things became easier for education, I think, back from the 2000s. Because prior to that, you had to attend college physically. You had to be there all the time. And, that was very difficult if you had to work full time also. So from the 2000s, most, in fact all of these educational programs became available online one by one. And you could start, you could actually, you don't have to confine yourself to the UK. You can actually attend courses in places like Penn State in the US. In the UK, you could always use, of course, places like Elmwood up in Scotland. I attended Myerscough. Now, there's plenty of other colleges available in the UK, such as Writtle, Reese Heath, to name but two. So whatever's local to yourself, or you found to your advantageous to access, you can follow up on. So here's a sort of a typical pathway you could follow. You could start off with a basic certificate in sports turf, probably following an apprenticeship. Now bear in mind, there's no age limit. You can start these courses at any time. I mean, I must have been in my 50s when I started my PhD. So don't be put off by how old you are. Just go for it. Following from the basic certificate, you can go on, like I said, to a foundation degree, or in Scotland, I think it would be a higher national diploma. You can go on then and do a full degree, a BSc, honours degree maybe. And if you're really into the education, you can go on and do a master's, whereby you would follow one particular subject and sort of become the master of that area. And of course, if you're really into education and you want to go the whole way, you can get a doctorate. Again, there's no age limit on this, so it probably a lower age limit maybe. But if you want to do the whole thing and become a crazy scientist, then go ahead. So, what do you need to do to get a PhD? Well, straightforward enough, I suppose. You have to carry out some original research and then produce a thesis. Sounds easy enough, but the research has to be something that hasn't been done before. And to produce a thesis takes a lot of work. Now, I did mine on the suppression of microdocium by phosphite in cool season turf grasses. And apart from looking at the effects on disease, you also have to look at the effects on plant growth and how phosphite, for example, was taken into the plant, how it assimilates in the plant, what happens to it in the soil. So there's a whole range of research you have to carry out. The thesis itself is this one here that I did. Is in 2 volumes. It's about 400 pages in total, so a lot of writing, a lot of work to get it done to the acceptable standard. So what else do you have to do? Well, you have to attend a lot of modules on various subjects. You have to learn how to express yourself, how to communicate your research. You have to attend, and you have to give a lot of lectures and webinars and presentations. That all goes towards your building up your credits for the PhD. You also have to publish, in peer-reviewed journals. That's always a premise for carrying out your PhD. So, what's involved in doing any sort of education, be it a certificate, a degree, or a PhD, doing it part-time while still working full-time? Well, it has some problems you have to overcome, all right? One of the biggest is actually managing your time, because you have to work full-time, do your normal job. So any of your research or your studying has to be done in the evenings or at the weekends. So you have to be able to manage your time. For me, laboratory work was quite a problem, because if I need to do any lab work, I had to travel from Ireland over to Bristol. So that meant taking time away from work. So one way I overcame that was I was able to purchase and set up my own lab at home. I was fortunate enough to have some support in purchasing various bits of equipment. That helped big time, and my research then was based around the equipment that I had at home. Again, classroom modules, I mentioned you have to attend quite a few modules or tutorials, and when I started off, this had to be done physically. I had to go to the university again in the UK and attend them. But as I progressed, these then became available online, with your own cameras and microphones, something like today's virtual presentation. So that again eased the burden of traveling. One big thing that I did miss in previous courses I did, we would have had interaction with other students and faculty members. So, tea times and breaks, you could chat away and talk about various things. Doing it virtually and away from home, you didn't have that. So I missed that, all right. So, I had to do some other things as well to work around this thing of working away from the university. For example, I mentioned, going to the lab. I did go a number of times. So there's one occasion, for example, when we had to travel, take the ferry across to Holyhead and drive down through England. And we had something like 120 pots of grass in the boot. So that wasn't too bad. But, I mentioned the lab. So coming back, then I would have stocked up at the university with various chemicals I needed. So we travelled back through customs, bringing back all these little plastic bags of white powder. So that took, lucky enough we weren't stopped, so I would have took some explaining. But other things working away from the university had to be sorted out, was figuring out various methodologies and processes, such as how to use a spectrophotometer. And YouTube. You can find almost anything on YouTube, from learning how to use a pipette, as I say, to learning how to use a spectrophotometer. So a very big benefit I found from YouTube. Also learned how to do some really good statistical analysis on that. Another thing I had to do, for example, some of the lab processes required me grinding up dried grass, and finding something to grind it up was tricky, until I found what's called a head shop in the local town, who dealt with various drug paraphernalia, and they fixed me up with something that would grind up any sort of grass. So that was interesting. And of course, carrying out the research here at home, you're liable to find microdocium growing in any of the drawers or cupboards around the place. Like I said, I had the home lab, so that was a big help. So, is this education, is it worth all the effort and work? How does it actually complement, your position as a turfgrass manager or as a greenkeeper? Well, here's the thing, right? First of all, it will give you a thorough understanding of the science behind turfgrass management and plant health and science in particular. But even more importantly, or maybe just as important, it will actually give you the confidence and the ability to interact with other scientists, with agronomists, with your committee members, your members, and of course your turfgrass peers. Also, you will develop skills in other areas other than the scientific research, and this is what I found of great benefit. You learn how to communicate. I mean, before I actually started on these courses, I would have found it very difficult to stand up in front of, 3 or 4 people and talk about something. Whereas, nowadays, no stopping me, I'm afraid. But anyway, apart from the science, you learn how to communicate, you learn time management, you learn how to prioritize work, you learn how to analyze critically, and of course, how to write reports that could target, for example, your members, others in the scientific community, or a whole range of different audiences. So that's some huge benefits you will get. And of course, these skills can be transferred even if you left the turfgrass business. These skills will stand to you all your life, no matter what area of work you're involved in. And of course, if you're very lucky and you get to carry out some research which develops new methods or practices, it could actually influence other sports turf managers and greenkeepers around the world. So that would be very advantageous and very beneficial to your own self-esteem, in fact. So, would I recommend this pathway of academic progress to others? Absolutely, sure. Apart from the positives I've just mentioned already, it's a very great, it can be a great personal challenge, and it can be very stimulating, and you will get some great satisfaction from it, well, eventually. And of course, for me, it opened up a whole new world. I got out and I was able to meet a whole load of people around the place, people like Frank Rossi and Stan Koska, Frank Wong, loads of people. And of course, what I really enjoyed doing over the last few years was getting out and meeting literally hundreds of other greenkeepers around the world. Places as far apart as Czech Republic, Sweden, the UK, of course, Ireland, Canada, the US. Meeting your fellow greenkeepers is really great, and being able to talk to them was one huge benefit I received from going through this education process. So, what's the take home message from this sort of short talk today? Well, turfgrass management is always evolving, it's always changing, and always provides new challenges. And, you need to be continuously prepared for these changes. And education and knowledge is vital for this. Because there's always scope for improvement, no matter what you're doing, and there's always new areas to research as well. So if an old guy like me from the outback of Ireland can do it, there's absolutely nothing stopping you guys. Get out and do it. So that's it for today, I'm afraid. Our time has come up, and hopefully you found it of interest. And my Twitter is here. If you have any questions or responses or comments, just pass them on there, or my email is there either. Always open for anything like that. Hopefully you found it of interest, and I just want to say thank you very much for listening. And just remember one thing: can anyone cut grass? Sure, provided you can get it to grow in the first place. Thanks a lot, everyone.